Picture this. It's January 24th, 2003 in Turin, Italy. The streets are frozen, but 100,000 people are standing in line outside the Lingotto factory. They aren't there for a protest. They aren't there for a religious figure. They are waiting 8 hours just to walk past a wooden coffin. Inside that coffin lies Gianni Agnelli. To the global markets, he was just a businessman. To Italy, he was the true king. For 50 years, this man didn't just build cars. He controlled 44% of Italy's entire GDP. He employed 31% of the country's industrial workforce. He owned the newspapers. People read the football team they cheered for, and the banks that held their mortgages. But today, that empire looks very different. It has vanished from the public eye and moved into the shadows of global finance. To understand how one bloodline still pulls the strings of a G7 economy, we have to go back to a dusty workshop in 1899. The year is 1899. Italy is barely a unified country. Giovanni Agnelli, a former cavalry officer, gathers 8 investors in Turin. They put down a combined capital of 800,000 lire. That's roughly $10 million in today's money. They call it Fabbrica d'Italiana Automobili Torino, or simply FIAT. But Giovanni isn't interested in sharing power. By 1906, he executes a ruthless financial maneuver. He buys out his partners one by one. He consolidates. 100% control through sheer aggression. This is the first lesson of the Agnelli playbook, never share the throne. By 1910, Fiat isn't just a car company. It is an industrial octopus. They are making ball bearings, commercial trucks, and marine engines. Then history hands them a golden ticket. World War I begins in 1914. While other companies crumble Fiat pivots, they produce the Fiat Rivelli machine gun. They build the engines for Italian fighter planes. By 1918, Fiat's workforce explodes from 4,000 to 40,000. Their profits jump 600% in just 4 years. Giovanni Agnelli proves that war is the most profitable business model on earth. But here's where it gets interesting. The war ends, but the ambition doesn't. Agnelli looks at Henry Ford in America and sees the future. He doesn't just want to build cars. He wants to build a city. In 1916, construction begins on the Lingotto building. It is an architectural beast. 5 floors of concrete stretching 500 meters long. Raw materials go in on the ground floor. They move up through the assembly lines, and a finished car drives out on the roof. Yes, the roof. It features a test track with banked corners 4 stories above the street. It is the largest car factory in the world, second only to Ford's River Rouge. But a factory needs stability, and Italy in the 1920s is chaos. Strikes are paralyzing. Turin communists are occupying the factories. So Agnelli makes a deal with the devil. Benito Mussolini takes power in 1922. Most industrialists are cautious. Agnelli goes all in. He becomes a senator of the kingdom. In 1923, Fiat becomes the engine of the fascist regime. During the 1930s, Fiat supplies the vehicles for Italy's invasion of Ethiopia. They build the CR-42 Falco biplanes for the Air Force. This intimacy with the regime protects their monopoly. Tariffs on imported cars hit 100%. If you drive a car in Italy in 1935, you drive a Fiat. There is no choice. But alliances have consequences. 1943, Comi's and the Allies bomb Turin into rubble. The Lingotto factory is smashed. Giovanni Agnelli dies in 1945, leaving a shattered empire and a tainted legacy. The family needs a new face, and they find one in a 24-year-old playboy named Gianni Agnelli. Is not an industrialist. Not yet. He is a lawyer by degree, hence the nickname, L'Avvocato. But in the 1950s, he is busy living the life of a Riviera prince. He dates Anita Ekberg and Rita Hayworth. He jumps from helicopters into the Mediterranean. While he parties, a man named Vittorio Valletta runs the company. Valletta is the operator. Gianni is the symbol, and the symbol works. Post-war Italy needs hope. They get the Fiat 500. Launched in 1957, It costs 465,000 lira. That is roughly 13 months of salary for a worker. It is affordable freedom. Italy moves from bicycles to cars overnight. By 1960, Fiat production hits 425,000 units a year. The economic miracle is fueled by Fiat engines. But Johnny knows that Italy is too small. He needs to conquer the enemy. The Cold War is freezing trade between East and West. The Americans won't touch the Soviet Union. Johnny doesn't care about politics. He cares about scale. In 1966, he flies to Moscow. He signs a deal to build a massive plant in Togliatti, Russia. He promises to produce 660,000 cars a year behind the Iron Curtain. The Americans are furious. The Italians are proud. Fiat is now a global superpower, but gravity always wins. And the 1970s are about to bring the empire to its knees. It's 1969. The hot autumn begins. Workers are tired of low wages and dangerous conditions. 100,000 metal workers march through Turin. They aren't asking nicely, they are throwing bricks. This spirals into the years of lead terrorist groups, like the Red Brigades, start targeting executives. Between 1974 and 1984, Fiat executives are assassinated. 27 others are shot in the legs. A tactic called kneecapping. Johnny Agnelli has to drive an armored car. He changes his route to the office every single morning. Inside the factory, productivity collapses. Absenteeism hits 25%. On any given day, 1 in 4 workers simply doesn't show up. The company is bleeding cash by 1976. Fiat is technically bankrupt. Banks stop lending. The Italian government is too weak to bail them out. Johnny needs a miracle or a warlord. He finds Muammar Gaddafi. Yes, the dictator of Libya. In December 1976, Gaddafi invests $415 million into Fiat. He takes a 96% stake in the company. It is a geopolitical shock. A NATO country's biggest defense contractor is now partly owned by a Soviet ally. But the money saves them. It buys Johnny time to fight the unions. In 1980, he fires 23,000 workers. The unions strike for 35 days. Then the March of the 40,000 happens. 40,000 Fiat managers and white-collar workers march against the unions. The strike breaks. Johnny wins. Fiat is back in control. By the mid-1980s, the Agnelli influence is total. Let's look at the portfolio. They own Fiat, Lancia, Autobianzi, Ferrari, and Alfa Romeo. They have 90% of the domestic car market. But it's not just cars. They own La Stampa, one of Italy's biggest newspapers. They own substantial stakes in Corriere della Sera. They own Juventus Football Club, the most popular team in the country. The Prime Minister calls Johnny before making major economic decisions. Johnny Agnelli is appointed a senator for life. He wears his watch over his shirt cuff. Millions of Italian men start wearing their watches over their shirt cuffs. That is soft power, but underneath the glamour, the rot is returning. The world is globalizing. Toyota and Volkswagen are building better cars for less money. Fiat relies on the Italian market, which is protected by quotas. When the European Union opens the borders in 1993, the protection vanishes. Fiat's market share in Italy drops from 60% to 40% in 5 years. The debts pile up again, and then the tragedy strikes closer to home. Johnny's chosen heir is his nephew Giovanni Alberto. He is brilliant, charismatic, and ready. But in 1997, he dies of a rare cancer at age 33. 3 years later, Johnny's own son Eduardo commits suicide. The king is old, the heirs are dead. The company is losing $2 million a day. When Johnny dies in 2003, the vultures are circling. The banks demand a breakup. They want to sell off the pieces of Fiat to pay the debts. The family turns to a 28-year-old kid, John Elkann, Johnny's grandson. He is quiet, shy, and speaks perfect English. Everyone expects him to sell. Instead, he hires a chain-smoking poker player named Sergio Marchionne. Marchionne looks at the books and sees a disaster, but he also sees a bluff he can call general. Motors had signed a put option with Fiat years earlier. Legally, Fiat could force GM to buy them. GM is terrified of acquiring Fiat's debt. So Marchione tells them, pay us to go away. GM writes a check for $2 billion just to cancel the contract. It is arguably the greatest heist in corporate history with that $2 billion. Marchione redesigns the Fiat 500. It becomes a global hit. But Marchione isn't done. 2008 comes the global financial crisis. The American car industry collapses. Chrysler files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The U.S. government is desperate to save jobs. Marchione flies to Detroit. He offers to take Chrysler off their hands. He doesn't pay a single dollar. Not one. He trades Fiat's small engine technology for equity in Chrysler. Over the next 5 years, Fiat slowly buys 100% of the American giant. They become Fiat Chrysler Automobiles. FCA, the center of gravity shifts from Turin to Detroit. And finally to the Netherlands. This is the part most Italians missed. While Marchione was fixing the cars, John Elkann was fixing the money. He realized Italy was a trap: high taxes, slow courts, zero growth. So he moved the family safe, the holding company. Exor moved its headquarters to the Netherlands. FCA moved its tax residence to London and its legal seat to Amsterdam. Ferrari was spun off as a separate company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. CNH Industrial, the trucks and tractors, moved to London. The Italian empire became a global hedge fund. Look at Exor today. It is ranked 317th on the Fortune Global 500. It holds $33 billion in assets. But look at what they own. They are the largest shareholder in Stellantis, the merger of Fiat Chrysler and Peugeot. They own 229% of Ferrari. They own 638% of Juventus. They bought 15% of Philips, healthcare technology. They own 43% of The Economist newspaper. They are moving into luxury with Christian Louboutin. They are no longer car makers. They are asset allocators. And the control? It is tighter than ever. Through a special Dutch voting structure, the Agnelli family, via a company called Giovanni Agnelli B., controls 52% of the voting rights, and Exor John Elkann answers to no one. So how does this family control Italy today? It's not about manufacturing jobs anymore. Fiat production in Italy has dropped from 1 million cars in 1970 to under 5,000,000. Today, the control is now psychological and media-driven. Through Getty, Gruppo Editorial Exor owns La Repubblica and La Stampa. These are the two biggest left-leaning and centrist newspapers in Italy. Imagine if the same family owned the New York Times and the Washington Post. They set the national agenda. When the government discusses electric vehicle subsidies, the newspapers frame the debate. When labor reforms are proposed, the editorial boards weigh in. Critics call it a conflict of interest. Elkann calls it responsible ownership. But the numbers don't lie. Italy pays for the family's transition. Stellantis regularly receives state-backed furloughs, Cassa Integrazione, for Italian workers. Taxpayers pay the wages when the factories pause, yet the dividends flow to the Netherlands in 2024. Stellantis approved a €47 billion dividend distribution. The Agnelli family's cut was roughly €700 million. Money made in Italy taxed in the Netherlands, spent in St. Moritz. Which brings us to the current standoff. The Italian government is currently fighting with Stellantis. Prime Minister Meloni has openly criticized the company for moving production to Poland and Serbia. She wants 1 million cars made in Italy. Stellantis says, give us subsidies or we leave. It is the same game Giovanni Agnelli played in 1920. It is the same game Gianni played in 1980. Leverage the workforce to secure the capital. But John Elkann is playing a longer game. He is slowly decoupling the family fortune from the automotive industry. He sees the writing on the wall. Chinese EVs are coming. Legacy auto is a brutal low-margin business. Why fight for 4% margins in car manufacturing when you can get 20% margins in luxury goods? Ferrari is now worth more than Ford and GM combined. Think about that. A company that sells 13,000 cars is worth more than companies selling 10 million. Elkan is betting the farm on luxury tech and healthcare. He is preparing to turn the Agnelli family into the European version of the Arnos, LVMH. Cars were just the vehicle to get them here. They might not be the vehicle for the next century. We started with a funeral in 2003, the end of the king, but in reality, the monarchy didn't end. It just privatized. The Agnelli family survived 2 world wars. They survived fascism. They survived communist terrorism. They survived bankruptcy, and they survived the death of their patriarch. Today, they don't need to be kings of Italy. They are citizens of the world. They traded political influence for financial invincibility. Your Fiat 500 might be made in Poland. Your Jeep might be made in Mexico, but the profit still flows to the same bank accounts in Turin and Amsterdam. It turns out the secret to controlling an economy isn't to build everything. It's to own the things that matter and move the rest. So here's the question for the next decade. As John Elkann pivots Exer into healthcare and luxury, will they eventually sell their stake in the car business entirely? Will the family that put Italy on wheels finally walk away from the assembly line?